Hey, it's Tony Messia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. We cover a wide range of local topics, including business, education, community news, nonprofits, and we do it with an approach that's smart, original, and interesting. So please check that out, thecharlotteledger.com. Today, we're sharing a conversation that I had with John Barton, the president of Northwood Office. Northwood is one of Charlotte's largest developers. It's probably best known locally as the owner of the 535-acre Ballantyne Corporate Park, which it bought from the Bissell Companies in 2017. In the last few years, Northwood has been working to transform the office park, the Ballantyne Hotel, and the surrounding area with its Ballantyne Reimagined project, which is starting now to come online. But it's also active in other areas of Charlotte, like the Metropolitan in Midtown, as well as around the country. John joined Northwood in 2018 from Atlanta, where he was the managing director and co-head of HFF's Office Investment Advisory Group. He has 27 years of experience in commercial real estate and is a graduate of Southern Methodist University, and he also has a law degree from Washington and Lee. In a conversation at Northwood's offices in Ballantyne in June of 2024, he and I talked about how and why Northwood went about the big Ballantyne transformation, what comes next, and more broadly, what the future looks like for real estate development in Charlotte and around the country. And we also talked about how Charlotte can avoid becoming the next Atlanta. I hope you enjoy the conversation. John, thanks for joining me.
Sure, glad to be here.
All right, so you and I met each other, I think, in 2019 when you were announcing the Ballantyne Reimagined project. And, you know, there's obviously since then there's been a lot going on in Ballantyne. You all have done a lot. I think it's a really interesting story, sort of what Northwood has done. And I want to definitely get into that, and especially at this really interesting time in commercial real estate. But first, I wanted to start off a little bit personally. Your background is in law, I believe. You went to law school, Washington and Lee, right?
Long time ago.
Okay. How did you make? I'm just curious how you made that transition from law into commercial real estate.
So I tell everybody, I went into law school with no intention of being a lawyer long term. I thought it would be, the training would be good. It would give me a lot of optionality in terms of what I wanted to do with my career. I could always support myself and have a profession, which was something I thought was important. But it really gives you a background to do a lot of different things. I was a liberal arts major in undergrad and a minor in business. So I took a lot of really business-heavy classes in school. And my intention was to practice for a few years and ultimately maybe work for a client or do something in business. I knew I wanted to run a business. I just didn't know what. And so I did that for over a year, and then the CMBS market, commercial mortgage-backed securities, had just sort of begun forming. This is back in the mid-90s, and it was a very prolific market at the time. There was a lot of profits being taken. Wall Street had started it, and it was all the inefficiencies created a lot of opportunities and a lot of growth. And so that's how I got into real estate and underwrote every different product type, originated kind of everything. And so it was a great training ground for a former lawyer and liberal arts major to really get into it. And I loved it. And so that's how I got the start in it. And then after that, I've basically been in the office building business in one form or another since then. I've done a little bit literally of everything since then, but joined Northwood in 2018. And I think you and I met at the first rezoning meeting, perhaps, which would have been 19. So moved here from Atlanta and have been very glad to be here ever since. So it's been a fun ride.
Right. I know you came here from Atlanta, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you if you're a Falcons fan, if you're an Atlanta sports fan. I feel like that would be unfair. But so when you took this job with Northwood, was the mission to kind of come in and take this asset here in Ballantyne and modernize it? Had the plans already been laid and they needed someone to execute it? How did that come together?
So there's a little context on Northwood, because I think it answers the broader question. Northwood is a vertically integrated private equity firm. And one of the things that distinguishes us from some of our competitors is we have operating platforms that specialize in certain product types. And historically, Northwood had retail, multi-hotels, a group we have in Europe called urban logistics, which is essentially like last mile distribution for Amazon or somebody, smaller buildings. What Northwood did not have was an office platform officially. We did through different local partnerships and joint ventures, but no official platform with a whole lot of structure. And so when Northwood bought Ballantyne from Smokey Bissell, in 2017, which predated me by roughly 1 year, basically Northwood also acquired a large infrastructure and operating platform that Smokey had done a great job of building out with a whole lot of people. And so the goal was to run Ballantyne, transform Ballantyne, do the things that were sort of conceived at the acquisition, and I'll get to your fundamental question on that in a second, but also to run the other assets that our fund has throughout the United States. So that basically, with the exception of the assets that had these sort of legacy joint venture partners and things in them, any new acquisitions Northwood on the office front, Northwood Office would run. And so the goal was to, my goals and objectives in joining, grow that platform, help facilitate our fund, buy as much as we can accretively and intelligently, and be able to run it in-house. And we like that because we like our investors to have full transparency throughout the sourcing of it, the operating of it, and the selling of it, and total accountability and transparency. Our founder was the former head of Blackstone's real estate a long time ago, and he was always very adamant about transparency to the investors. And so that has very much remained a hallmark of what we do. Having all this in-house capability in these different platforms is a critical piece of that. So since I joined, we've definitely grown our footprint in terms of what we manage. We manage assets in Boston, Miami, Atlanta, Nashville, LA. We had something in San Francisco we actually sold out of a couple years ago, and then Seattle as well. And then obviously the stuff here, and we added Metropolitan Midtown during the pandemic. And so it's been great because we've been able to grow capabilities of Northwood Office beyond just Charlotte, which is Smokey was pure Charlotte before. So that's been great. But the largest asset in our fund is Ballantyne. In our global fund, this is the biggest asset. Charlotte and North Carolina are our largest investments globally. So we're very focused on making sure that everything runs really well, but there's so much to do here with 535 acres, a former golf course. There's a lot of unlocked value that we needed to harvest. And so part of the business plan was transforming that. There are a lot of unknowns in the process, and a lot of that is figured out, post-closing by hiring the best people we can to make sure that we get sort of international perspective. That's when we brought in Sasaki as a master planner, but we want the local and regional perspective of Land Design, who've done a lot of the master planning before, and a lot of other consultants and architects and things that are being used to sort of formulate the plan. That started in earnest in 2018. I mean, there was a lot of interviewing of the master planners and sort of a competition there to see who we hire. But 2018 is really when we kicked it off, and that's when I'd started. My predecessor, Ned Kern, who I know you know Ned was very civically involved and wanted to go do other things, and so Northwood wanted to make sure that Ned's successor was in place before we sort of started the full thing because of the nature of it's multi-year. It's a big undertaking,
right.
And Ned was gracious enough actually to work with us on it, which was great because he was so involved, historically with Bissell, and he's a great friend and great at what he does. And so it's a pleasure to work with him and all the other people we worked on.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Ballantyne. It's helpful knowing all the background on Northwood, but there is a lot of history here. I mean, not history in the 100-year-old history, although actually I've come to learn there are some historical sites in Ballantyne. But you think of Ballantyne being developed in the mid to late 90s, the Harris family and the Bissells. When I first came to Charlotte, my wife was from Charlotte, and my father-in-law lived actually pretty close to here. Late 90s, when you came here, there was like a Target, there was the pillars at the main intersection there on Ballantyne Commons Parkway. Maybe the movie theater just opened up, but it was this big area, a lot of development. And since then, in the last 20 years, it's really filled in.
Yeah,
and it's really changed.
Farmland in the 90s. And it was through the efforts of the people you mentioned, primarily Smokey, and Johnny Harris, that ultimately served as a catalyst for what it is today. It's pretty amazing when you look at it, how fast it's happened and the magnitude of it. It's very impressive.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's almost no developable land left, is my understanding. There's a few pieces here and there, but it's filling in pretty quickly. And so, as you said, Northwood, bought the office park. 535 acres. So that was a $1.2 billion transaction in 2017. That's a big investment. So what was the thinking on, we need to do something here? Because, a very nice hotel, very nice golf course, a lot of office space. What was the thinking on, okay, here's why we need to do something big?
Right. So we fundamentally are a value investor, and when you look at something as the size of Ballantyne, it's hard to find things that are even remotely comparable that you can acquire, because it's just so big. There are very few people that can do it, but to have the amount of potential that existed in the golf course, Smokey had always intended to, at some point, activate the golf course. I think that he'd gotten to the point in his career and he'd done very well. He decided he wanted to have somebody else do it. It's how we came in. But our plan, and for context, when we bought it, we had 40 office buildings over the 535 acres, 4 hotels, different types of hotels, and this large 18-hole public golf course. And so Northwood's plan was to come in. There were some sites that were immediately actionable that, like, for example, the Overlook office building that we built and delivered in May of 20, totally spec, meaning not pre-leased. Smokey had a history of that. I think of the 40 buildings that he built, 37 were built totally spec. Only 3 were pre-leased. So there's been a history of success in doing that. We delivered it in May of 20 in the pandemic at 0% lease, which was a bit of a nail biter.
Sounds a little bit rough.
Yeah, we were $1 million under budget and on time, but obviously the world had changed a lot in terms of pre-leasing.
Yeah,
but today,
nobody's signing leases in the summer of 2020.
Not a good time to be doing that. But however, we did quite well with it. We're 99% leased today, and we got leased up pretty well with the expansion of Credit Karma. They're an existing customer. 30,000 feet here. They've grown to 225,000 feet and are about 75% of the building. We have many other customers as well. So that's been great. At the same time, we're building 212 apartment units in Tower View right next door. And so that was sort of the immediate activation. Then there was the long-term activation, and that's what led to the rezoning so that we could go in, transform the golf course, still maintain lots of green space and a lot of things Ballantyne's known for, the walkability of the trails, the bikeability, the connectivity. One of the things we did in the rezoning, as you know, is we built a bridge that connects into the greenway so you can ride your bike all the way up to Uptown and back. But really activating that and creating almost a downtown for Ballantyne with a lot of amenities, both residential, the apartments, the retail being the big focus. We wanted to make sure that it was vibrant and active and served not our hotels as well as the office and the community. And also, too, in the process, build a stream park that everybody can access and kids can play in. You see a lot of parents out there with their children, grandparents. It's great to see. An amphitheater that'll hold about 5,000 people. So we really wanted to transform not only our asset, but the entire South Charlotte community and make it really a regional asset and ideally one of the best mixed-use projects in the Sun Belt. Mm-hmm. And that was really our aspiration.
So is it part of a larger trend that, it used to be, yes, when it was built, the idea that you could have an office park and people would drive to the office park and then drive home. That was sort of the way it was looked at. But I think that is changing, I think. If you look at development patterns, not just in Charlotte, but all over the place, you're starting to see some of these, live, work, play things develop a little bit more. Was that part of the thinking, so, or you're tapping into that trend?
Yeah, very much so. That trend has been going on for many years. I think, if anything, the pandemic accelerated it even further because as employers have struggled to get people back to the office, part of getting them back to the office is giving them a reason to be in the office. And so the importance of amenities, walkability, making work fun, so to speak, is all a critical piece. High quality, nice finishes, a good feeling is a big piece of, if you look at the leases that are getting done throughout the United States, Europe has recovered much more favorably in terms of the hybrid work has not been as much of a problem there as it has been in the US. But if you look at the vast majority of the leasing that's being done in the US, and Charlotte's no different, it generally tends to be in the well-amenitized, high-quality, walkable properties. And frankly, the companies that are focusing on doing the leases there are less price sensitive. They really view the real estate as an HR cost. And so they just say, okay, if I have this space, Credit Karma is a good example. They put a lot of money into their space. it's tremendous space. I won't go through all the amenities that they have because I don't know if they want me talking about it, but there are a lot. And anything you can think of, they have there. And part of it is their recruiting and their growth. I mean, going from 30,000 feet to 225,000, a lot of people to hire, and that's an important component. The bowl, which is what we call, as you know, the area where all the retail is that we've built, and the residential tower, they're directly across from that. That was a big part of their decision. And at the time that the building was being built and delivered, essentially, we were literally excavating dirt out of there, and it was a lot to sort of envision, but they had the forethought to see it and believe that we would do what we said we would do.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about it, because I cover a lot of commercial real estate, talk to a lot of developers, you see all the time people put out renderings or they have ideas of things they'd like to do, but you all have actually done it. I mean, the curtain is opening, Old Mecklenburg Brewing is opened, you have a number of restaurants, North Italia, Flower Child. You guys are actually doing it. Yeah. What does it take to actually get something on this scale done? I mean, it's a lot bigger. I mean, to your point, there are advantages to doing that you control a lot of space.
Right.
But actually doing it, is it different than doing smaller kind of one-off projects, doing something on such a large scale?
Definitely. I think one of the most critical things in what we do is first hiring the right people, both internally and externally, having the right partners and people that are wired to be collaborative and to be communicative, people that we don't have a bunch of big egos that insist on getting their way on things. We truly solve for what's the best outcome for our investors, for our customers, for the public, what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that being very careful about who you hire and who you pick that sort of has that same philosophical approach is critical, because I think and this is one of the things that makes us competitive, because we have all the different platforms and we all work together. We have other than urban logistics, I mean, every discipline that we have is reflected at Ballantyne. In many developments, normally you have a developer that specializes in maybe residential, and that's brand X, and then there's brand Y that does retail, and brand Z that does office, and they're not ultimately controlled by the same sort of ultimate parent company. And sometimes that can cause people to focus on only like their area, and sometimes that has negative impacts to the other groups that are involved, even though it's a one project, and in theory everybody is incentivized to make the project great. Sometimes that can present challenges. And so I think that was one of the competitive advantages that we had, is that we made sure that we had alignment across the board. We made sure that we had the third party groups, some of which I mentioned earlier, had that same philosophy, and that we were ultimately solving for the best possible project we could in the aggregate. Sometimes there are some compromises that have to be made on certain product types that we don't necessarily like, in a vacuum, but they serve the overall purpose and good for the investment, and that's what we focus on.
Mm-hmm. So what's the next milestone? I mean, as we're talking, you're starting to open some of the retail, and you've got apartments under construction. I mean, what are some of the things looking forward? Yeah. What are some of the next steps that people are going to see?
So the next steps are, we're very focused on getting our retailers opened. We have signed leases on 81% of what we've built and are building. In the Oro 26-story residential tower, 356 units that's under construction, everything else is built. The standalone jewel boxes in the different buildings are built. All of those buildings are leased with the exception of half of one, and there's a lot of activity on it. We're being pretty selective. The demand has been really good, and we have some great retailers. North Italia, Flower Child are open, OMB open, as you mentioned, not Postino, but Honeysuckle Gelato, the ice cream place. But basically between now and roughly September-ish, you're going to see a lot of openings, and I think that Hawkers is not going to be open until January. But basically, which is an Asian group out of South End, really great food. Excited about them. So they're the only sort of straggler of the ones that have been signed in January, and then all the others will basically be open over the coming months. So it's been great, but then of course we're always planning for the future. We were entitled, as you might recall, in phases 1 and 2 of the rezoning, I'm rounding a lot, but 2,000 apartments, 300,000 feet of retail. Wegmans, they're going to use about 110,000 of that. Mm-hmm. That's on track, and I had no idea how emphatic people are about Wegmans in the
They're
area.
very emphatic. I mean, have you seen these Facebook groups? They have like
Yes.
2,000 people, and they're talking about they're driving up to Raleigh to go get some
it's incredible.
pierogies or something.
It's incredible. And one of my favorites after the announcement was made, one of the people had commented, "This is the best day of my life." And I thought, boy, that's quite a statement. So we've been really happy. I think we clearly have plans beyond that. So there's plenty to do. And then there's a potential for even phase 3 later, to the extent that there's a major transportation event, whether it's light rail or widening of 521, that would trigger other entitlements as well. But that comes with, another traffic study, which means probably more infrastructure costs and things like that. And as I've said to our team, we're out of the infrastructure business for the foreseeable future. We have spent, I think, about $110 million for perspective on that. So it's significant. We have massively over-improved the road systems and everything for what we've built. And so I feel really good about that, because we've over-delivered in terms of what we told the politicians we would do and the community. And we really, that was very important to us.
Yeah, I mean, you all are definitely spending a lot of money, to do this and to get this done. And like you said, I mean, you're starting to see some of the payoffs and some of the numbers you mentioned, the people turning out to some of these retailers that are very well known. Yeah. But what's it going to take for Northwood? How do you benchmark the success for Northwood? I mean, like, you're laying out a lot of money. Right. For this to work out, what has to happen, and how are you looking at it from the business point of view?
So if I get straight to the point, the ultimate measure of success is what the sale price is and what the profits are at the end. I mean, to be blunt, there's a lot that happens in between, and there are milestones in between. Unfortunately, right now, as you know, the capital markets and equity markets, debt markets are in a lot of disarray. And so it's a challenging time. But I look at it every day in terms of, are we leasing more space? Are we providing the great mix of retail customers that overall enhance the whole thing? So it really is a very highly symbiotic relationship that we have. And when you look at, we do a lot of mixed use generally, a lot of projects throughout the U.S. and those assets they're sort of we refer to as the mixed use premium that you see because of the walkability, the amenitization, all the things that people want. So normally you can get higher rents on your office, you get higher hotel rates, everything benefits from that.
All right, we're just about out of time. I got one final question for you that I just wanted to ask, because I know you are familiar with Atlanta, and now you're very familiar with Charlotte. A lot of people are always saying, we don't want to be the next Atlanta. We don't want to develop and become.
They say that in Nashville. They say it everywhere. Yeah.
So what, is Charlotte becoming the next Atlanta, and what are the lessons of development in Atlanta that we can apply in Charlotte?
Well, I was in Atlanta recently, and I mean, traffic there is very significant, and it always has been. Atlanta's a great city. The demand for Atlanta and all the people moving there is tremendous, and then with Hartsfield Airport and the number of people that are accommodated there, very diverse workforce, a very diverse economic base generally, great location. I mean, Atlanta is a phenomenal city that I think will always do well. But frankly, the demand for being in Atlanta has far outpaced the transportation and infrastructure. They've made good improvements with a lot of the work around 285 and things like that. And some of these toll roads and things like that they're adding. They're sort of always under construction. They had MARTA, their version like light rail, their version of light rail, which runs from the airport and sort of all over. And I mean, even back when I was first working in Atlanta, early 2000s sort of time frame, we had a building, my old firm had a building on a MARTA stop. And it was, back then, like it wasn't as much of a focal point as it is today because, the traffic wasn't as bad. But as you look at the transportation infrastructure that they have, what they're doing with it, and the long-term planning, which they're very much on. I'm on a board down there, the Atlanta Beltline. It's a Special Services District Advisory Board. And as you might, I don't know how much you know Atlanta, but there's an old abandoned railroad line called the Beltline, and all this great development has taken place on it. And the amount of progress that's being made along the Beltline, a lot of which is being done with federal funding, is tremendous. I mean, it's really been a game changer in terms of growth in Atlanta. And also the ability to open up the community to areas that in the past maybe haven't had access to that. And I think that's been one of the themes of Ballantyne too, is, we're Stream Park, Amphitheater, whatever. We're seeing people at Ballantyne that have really not been here before, and that's been outstanding. I think the same is the case with Atlanta, but Atlanta fundamentally, they've got, there have been issues with water and sewer. The federal government had to get involved. A lot of these southern cities have infrastructure. You heard about stuff like in the news a couple of years ago with Jackson, Mississippi, and the federal government had to take over the water system there. Thankfully, we don't have those problems here. I think Charlotte, when people say Charlotte is becoming Atlanta, I can assure you as a former Atlantan and somebody who still goes there, we still own assets there, the traffic in Charlotte compared to Atlanta, no comparison. It is, when I heard people complain about traffic in Charlotte, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I live in town, my drive from Ballantyne, every way, every time of the day, no matter what, is 25 minutes. It's the easiest drive ever. And so I know there are peak times on, 45 and 77 can be a bit challenging from time to time, but I think that overall we're doing well. Do we need to think about the future as it relates to the light rail? Of course. And we plan for that in our rezoning. We actually have a reservation of land that would run the blue line over through the park with 3 stops. That's one of those things that would trigger that last phase of development potentially, or entitlement rather, again, subject to a traffic study and more improvements in terms of traffic mitigation. But I think the city knows that we need to be ahead of it. The challenge is getting the political fortitude to advance a lot of those things. But there's also a key fact, and that's funding. Because even though the federal government might fund a lot of this stuff, there's always a local match, always, and the studying and everything that happens. And when we get back to the topic about the taxes, and sort of the tax base being impacted because of all these commercial buildings, there's less money to do things like that. So again, we need to get all these formerly income-producing properties back to producing income in a way that's financially feasible for the private sector, because the government can't do it on its own. It's just not going to happen.
All right, that sounds like a good place to end it. Unless you've got anything else you want to add.
I thank you for your objective reporting, Tony. You've always done a very nice job.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Yep, glad to do it.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap. To our listeners, thank you for listening. Charlotte Ledger Podcast is produced by Lindsey Banks.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.